So we're looking at, and we're going to conclude our discussion of the Aeneid today by descending into the underworld. But before we get to the underworld, I want to recapitulate some of the things that we have discussed already. And I want to highlight the ways in which Virgil's Aeneid as an epic builds on, but also to some degree exceeds the epics of Homer. Although, as I said to you, Homer's epics can't be surpassed because they are the very foundation for what Virgil does with it. And that's important, and it becomes a part of the epic tradition that successive epics will build on the ones that went before them, but argue that their vision of heroism and of the epic exceeds that of their forebears. So one of the things we noted about the epic in the Greek rendering is that the Greek epic looks backwards to a better time when men were of the Bronze Age. There were demigods. There were men that were of divine origin that walked the earth. One, the son of a goddess or a god, and also a human partner. Hesiod, in his epics, which we didn't look at, in his Theogony and Works and Days, describes the Golden Age. But for him, it was an age in the past, and it was an age that could never be recovered. We'd fallen from the Golden Age. There was a war amongst the gods. The Silver Age had been a war amongst the gods, the sky gods and the earth gods. So the Olympians and the Titans. And that battle being won by the Olympians, now there was a rule and order, the rule of law run by Jupiter. And then this began this Bronze Age, and to some degree we're describing the Bronze Age here when we're talking even about Aeneas. Because remember, he is also not just of human parentage. But, and now we've entered into the age in which Virgil himself is writing. This is the Iron Age. This is the age of men. The gods have retreated from the earth. We don't see the same gods being present in the same way, and yet they are there in the background. But the Greek epics look to the past as the age of promise, and there's a nostalgia for the past. There's a desire to go back there, but we can't go back there. So there's just a sense of loss, but there's a sense of a greatness that lies in the past that we want to hold on to and pass on to our forebears. But we can't recover it. And Homer regularly refers to the greatness of these men like Achilles and Odysseus and so forth. But Virgil is different than that. His heroism, his hero, and his epic doesn't just point to the greatness of the past. It wants to observe the greatness that is now upon us and will be in the future. And so, as I said to you at the outset, he's pointing to the greatness that has come from the peace of Rome, the Pax Romana brought about by this man, his contemporary, Caesar Augustus. And Augustus has said and wants Virgil to promote the idea that we are now in a sort of golden age in which all the world is under the rule of law. And there will be, and rebellion has been dealt with. There is no more civil war. Augustus himself has defeated his opponents, Mark Antony, and who's his name? In the Battle of Actium, defeats his other opponent. Drawn total blank. But there's a triumvirate that after Julius Caesar dies, and there are three men that rule for a time, and there's a war between them, but now that has been won by Augustus Caesar, and now we're in an age of peace. And the idea that Caesar wants to present is that this age of peace will be an eternal one. This will continue here on forward. So it's looking forward to a time that will be as great as the age of peace when Saturn ruled the earth and ruled all things before the great rebellions. And so it's a patriotic epic. It's a national epic. It's about not just an individual. It's not just the greatness of Achilles. It's not the greatness of Odysseus. It's the greatness of a whole people. And the people matter here. It's not just an individual that's being celebrated, it's the people. And Aeneas is celebrated above all because he is not an individual. He does not see his own self-interest as being the primary motivation for action. And most of all, he is dedicated not only to the past, although he is dedicated to the past. So that image of Aeneas leaving the city of Troy in Book 2 with his father on his back, holding his son's hand, clutching his household gods, is the image of pious Aeneas, right? He is going to hold on to his father. He's going to carry him out on his back out of the burning city. He's also got his son. He's not going to leave him behind because he's the future. And he's going to remain loyal to his household gods. The gods, and in the politics of the day, politics and religion are inseparable. I need to say that as well, because post-Christianity, we separate the church from the state. There's a separation of powers, right? It's not the same thing. Whereas in his day, in the Greeks and even in the Roman day, the man who's the emperor has divine status. And in the case of Augustus Caesar, claims to be a god. But same thing in Egypt. You'll see it in Scripture. Same thing in Babylon. He wants to be worshipped, not just to be obeyed as a ruler. He is to be revered as the manifestation of the divinity on earth. So this is a religious epic. And when we talk about the fate, this has religious significance. This is the divine will being exercised. By doing this, you are doing what is godly, Aeneas. You are doing what's fated. It's not just necessity. I've talked about the necessity element of it. It's also that it's blessed by the gods themselves that he should do this. And he does do it. And so we saw, and I'll say a little bit more about this because I want to go to the scene in the Aeneid where Virgil and Dido part ways, and Dido dies in her city by her own hand. There's political background in this encounter between Dido and Aeneas because they are the respective heads of their empires, or what will become empires, and a war will be fought between the two of them. So Aeneas is the grounder of Rome, Dido the grounder of the Carthaginian Empire, and the two of them will fight 3 wars over supremacy of the Mediterranean over the prior 200 years, leading up to the time of Augustus Caesar. And these are wars in which Carthage actually often seemed the superior. So the famous Hannibal, the great general, marched over into the Italy over the Pyrenees, over the Alps, with elephants. The Romans had never seen elephants. They're terrified of them. These are war beasts coming over, and he defeated the Romans over and over, the great general Hannibal. And all they did was they basically gave way before him and gave land for time. And it wasn't a scorched earth policy, but it was something like that. We'll just wait him out. He's powerful, he's more shrewd than we are, but we have time on our side. His supply lines will run short, and eventually we'll just wait until he falls, and that's exactly what happened. So Romans are known for their own willingness to suffer and endure for the sake of victory, and that represents Aeneas himself here. But Augustus has just brought to an end a whole century of civil war. Bloody civil war in which brother is set against brother and family against family. And now there's a peace. But this epic which Virgil is pronouncing is a Roman epic, the Roman epic. So it has a sense of victory and the sense of the golden age about it, but it's not only triumphalism. There's sadness about everything that happens and a sense of loss and suffering. And Aeneas suffers. And he suffers no more than in this instance of Dido. But wherever Aeneas goes, suffering follows and death goes with it. And here in particular, when he leaves her, she takes her own life. And this is seen as it's a mini tragedy within the epic. I don't think that Virgil means us to be quite as sympathetic as the images that I have on the screen here will suggest. Actually, this is in the Underworld. These are all actually from book 6, so it's not on the screen behind me. But the idea of the two lovers, star-crossed lovers, as it were, like Romeo and Juliet, wanting to marry and yet being prevented by the gods from doing so, that's been celebrated in Western art, in music, etc., as I say. But in Virgil's own mind, he probably has a less flattering image of Dido in his mind. He's probably trying to draw an analogy between Mark Antony and Cleopatra. So the Roman audience, when they think Dido, they think that's our mortal enemy. That's the queen of the Carthaginians. First thought. Second thought is there was another African queen who also almost brought our empire to ruin, and that was Cleopatra. So they probably have a visceral dislike of Dido, which we don't have as a reader. We're sympathetic to her. I don't think Virgil is quite as sympathetic as we would be. Yes?
Could it also be that this sympathy lacks because she didn't obey the gods?
Yes. So she's impious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like he paints a picture of like, this is what not to do.
Yep. And it's universal, right? So it's not just for the sake of Virgil or for Aeneas that he has to do the pious thing. She is also impious, but both of them are impious here, right? Because he dallies there and he threatens to be distracted by the presence of Dido, but she likewise is willing to sacrifice her whole people for the sake of her furor, this word, furor, which that threatens to undo the pious acceptance of fate. But I want to look at these last few encounters here in book 4, and I said I'd come back to it because I didn't quite get through it, and then I'm going to go to book 6, and we will look at the transformation of Aeneas in the underworld, and he goes from being a figure like Odysseus with lots of hesitation and doubt, and he's not a very admirable figure. Like when he leaves Dido, we don't like him. He's not very likable. His likability factor is low. His heroism may be high, but he's not likable. Whereas Achilles is likable. Odysseus is basically likable. Even when he lies, you don't think he's a scoundrel. Aeneas seems not entirely likable. And that's part of the suffering that a Roman will have to undergo, is even though you're unpopular and not likable, you're going to do it because the greater good is being met, right? That's part of the whole picture here. He's willing to do what needs to be done. He's like Batman, right? He's the Dark Knight. Probably not, but never mind. But a little bit like that. He's going to be disliked, but he is going to do the great thing that everyone will eventually praise him for. But she, as you said, Dido cannot love him and be a good queen, and Aeneas cannot love her and be the man he's fated to be. So this is an impossibility, and yet they dally in this. And as we saw last time, rumor spreads the nature of their transgression abroad, and it ensures that it is even worse in the minds of the people than it would otherwise be. And if you think about how social media works these days and so forth, it blows up, and social media is a good illustration of rumor, actually. So many eyes, so many mouths, it never stops. And it amplifies things. Some of it's true, some of it's false. It mixes them and it doesn't matter, and it's constant. And Aeneas, when we left off, tried to explain to Dido why he had to leave her. It was fated. He couldn't do otherwise. She didn't accept it. She did not. It's not that it was hard to understand. She didn't accept it. And again, this is part of why Virgil's Roman audience would have contempt for her. This is an un-Roman thing to do. You do your duty. You're a Roman. You ought to understand the appeal to duty here, and you don't. And this is why the Romans are superior to the Carthaginians, right, in some ways. Now note this, I've presented a little bit unfairly there. When we come to books 7 to 12, which we're not going to read here, the Ternes, his military rival, I think is more admirable than Aeneas in some ways. And this is the interesting thing, is that Virgil's depiction of fate almost seems like might makes right. At the end of the day, you just need to get it done. And it doesn't matter who's morally superior. You just need to be victorious. Because Ternes seems to be almost morally superior to Aeneas in the depiction. And yet he dies. And that's all that matters, that fate is fulfilled by whatever means. And that means enduring in those situations. So he tries to explain in 446 to 492 why he must leave Dido. And I think he's quite sincere in this. I've taught this over the years, and some students have said, well, he's just saying that, right? Because he's trying to, get out of this jam, and he's ready to run off, and he's used her, and now he doesn't have real feelings for her. I don't think the text actually supports that reading. I think his feelings for her are genuine, and that's what makes him heroic, in a sense. He's doing what he doesn't want to do, but what he must do for the sake of the future. And that view, that idea of piety, has been lost in our day. Everyone in our day seems to think that self-interest is always the motivation for action. And that's because it always is. So we have an election happening right now. Is anyone talking about debt? Debt is the burden that you are going to be bearing on your backs for the rest of your lives. The people in power will not pay that debt, but you will. I'm serious here. This is entirely serious. That is so racking up debt. If you have a credit card and you get the interest payments on the debt are huge, right? And if you don't pay them down, the debt grows. Right, well, who's going to pay for that debt, the burden that you'll bear on your backs, other than the future? It's the young people who will bear the debt of the transgressions or the lack of piety of those in charge right now. It sounds like, oh, great, we'll give you away free things. Well, there's no such thing as free. It's been borrowed. Somebody's going to get paid for that. And the people in charge are not going to pay it, but you will. So this is, to me, is an impiety. Now, Aeneas is not like that. He does it for little Iulus, right? Not himself. He does it for those. He does it in obedience to the gods, out of respect for his father, but above all for the sake of the future. So he has hope, and he looks to the future. And our current circumstance, the political life that we live in our day, we don't see much of that. Nobody cares about the unborn. Nobody cares about the future, because they don't have a vote. They can't give me power, right? Very sad, but it is so. And Aeneas is heroic in that sense, because there's nothing in it for him, really. So she doesn't understand what he has to say and goes on. Now, he's not a colorless hero, in other words. He controls his emotions. He puts down the furor, the passions within his own breast, and looks to the glory set before him, the glory of Rome. So he's a bit like Abraham, right? The promise has been given to Abraham of a future. From your seed, ancestors as many as the stars. He doesn't have any children, right? And he has to have faith in God, that God will lead him and will do what he has promised. Here, likewise, Aeneas, you will be the founder of a great empire. Okay, but I have to leave everything behind. It's all sadness, constant trials. I think that in some ways that's a good analogy. He's a lot like Abraham in Scripture. But the child here, the child of promise, he's the future. Yes?
So you said you were talking about voting. If you don't mind me asking, so who do you plan to vote for the Canadian elections?
Who do I plan to vote for? I'll talk to you outside class about that. I don't like that, the politicking in class, but I do think the issues are relevant. And that's what I'm trying to bring across in the class. The issues that are dealt with in epics are perennial in their importance. They really do touch on issues that aren't just, this isn't just entertaining, it's talking about what is most important and what you live for. Well, sure, I'll tell you who I'm going to vote for. I'm not even sure who I'm going to vote for right now. But I know who I'm not going to vote for. That I know for sure. But so he is not a boring figure. He is a figure of great self-sacrifice and great long suffering. So in that sense, a little like Odysseus. At this stage, he is like Odysseus. And he's going to become like Achilles in battle for the same purpose. And that's why, as I say, the beginning of the epic was arma virumque, of arms and of a man I sing, says Virgil. That man who is both like Odysseus and Achilles, here he is. So I'll pick it up in book 4, and with Virgil's own reflections on this, 561, because the narrator who sits in the background, remember he's appealed to the muse. So the muse is telling the story to some degree, but it's almost as if Virgil himself, the author, can't help but comment here and intervene and let his voice be heard in this scene, because he's so moved by this conflict between these two figures who have what is fated set before them, and one of them is going to do what he has to do. He's going to be pious, and the other who won't accept it. And here's Virgil, who's simply puzzled by the response. And here's what he says, 561. What were your feelings, Dido, then? What were the sighs you uttered at that sight, when far and wide from your high citadel you saw the beaches boil and turmoil take the waters, with such a vast uproar before your eyes? Voracious love, to what do you not drive the hearts of men? Again, she must outcry. Again, a suppliant must plead with him, must bend her pride to love, and so not die in vain, and with some way still left untried. And then she speaks. He's commenting on the woman who is in love, as she sees it, and really is, because, again, Cupid has shot her with an arrow, serving the goddess Venus. She is in love, but she is overcome. She has no choice. She's been captured by this. But she's a victim of it, and she's destroying herself in the process. But what were you thinking? But then he goes out and makes a broader comment. He's not just talking about Dido. He's saying that to voracious love, to what do you not drive the hearts of men? Now all people are subject to the same thing. And for Virgil, this is a problem. And piety is the solution. Don't do what you are driven to do by what you call love. This will not end well. You must tame your passions. You must not think of your own self. You must think of the greater good above all, of your family, of your nation, and of the gods. Keep those in the forefront. Tame your passions. Be a stoic like Virgil, right? So now she speaks to her sister. Anna, says Dido, you see them swarm across the beaches. From every reach around they rush to sea. The canvas calls the breezes, and already the boisterous crewmen crown the sterns with garlands. But I was able to foresee this sorrow. Therefore I can endure it, sister. Yet in wretchedness I must ask you for this one service, Anna. Treacherous Aeneas has honored you alone, confiding even his secret feelings unto you. And you alone know all his soft approaches, moods. My sister, go, to plead with him, to carry this message to my arrogant enemy. I never trafficked with the Greeks at Aulis to root the Trojans out. I never sent a fleet to Pergamus, never disturbed his father's ashes, or Anchises' shade, that now Aeneas should ward off my words from his hard ears. Where is he hurrying? If he would only grant his wretched lover this final gift, to wait for easy sailing and favoring winds. I now no longer ask for those old ties of marriage he betrayed, nor that he lose his kingdom, he deprived of lovely Latium. I only ask for empty time, a rest and truce for all this frenzy until fortune teaches me, defeated, how to sorrow. I ask this, pity your sister as a final kindness. When he is granted it, I shall repay my debt, and with full interest by my death. She's got nothing left, but she just delay a bit. That's it. Like, why? She's feeding on something she can't have, but she doesn't want to let it go. She's self-pitying. Pathetic figure. So Dido pleads, and her poor sister carries these lamentations, and she brings them back. For lamentation cannot move Aeneas. His graciousness towards my plea, any plea is gone. Fate is opposed. The god makes deaf the hero's kind ears. And then, 620, maddened by the fates, unhappy Dido calls out, at last for death. It tires her to see the curve of heaven, that she may not weaken in her plan to leave the light she sees while placing offerings on the altars with burning incense. Terrible to tell, the consecrated liquid turning black. The outpoured wine becomes obscene blood. But no one learns of this, not even Anna. And more, inside her palace she had built a marble temple to her former husband that she held dear and honored wonderfully. She wreathed that shrine with snow-white fleeces and holy day leaves. And when the world was seized by night, she seemed to hear the voice and words of her dead husband calling out to Dido. Alone above the housetops, death its song, an owl often complains and draws its long, slow call into a wailing lamentation. Many prophecies of ancient seers now terrify her with their awful warnings, and in her dreams it was the fierce Aeneas himself who drives her to insanity. She always finds herself alone, abandoned, and wandering without companions on an endless journey, seeking out her people, her Tyrians, in a deserted land. So she is driven by and even Pentheus, he says, when he is seized by frenzy, sees files of furies, punishing gods of the underworld. And a double sun and double Thebes appear to him. Double Thebes, remember Thebes? We just had left Thebes and Oedipus appear to him. And on when Orestes, son of Agamemnon, driven across the stage, flees from his mother, armed with torches and black serpents, on the threshold the awful goddesses of vengeance squat. And so she's gone mad, driven and tormented by gods of the underworld. The blood or the wine she's poured on the altar to sacrifice turns to blood in her mind's eye. She sees this. She's like Lady Macbeth. She can't get the blood off her hands. She's imagining things now. She's already as if she were in the underworld. She's not yet there, but she's going to go there. But there's a pathetic fallacy, an anticipation of what's about to happen and what she sees. Yes?
Would it seem here as her like kind of hallucinating?
Yes. She's in a frenzy. She can't really see things as they are. And so the furor which led her to abandon piety and duty and fate has now led her to abandon her reason, and she's lost her mind. And Virgil is saying this is what love does. Makes people lose their minds. And this is the ultimate effect. If you don't hold on to what is good and right, this is what will happen to you. And she goes down, and then she comes up with a ruse. And what's the ruse? She tells her sister that she's had enough and she wants to deal with the problem of Aeneas. She's not going to take all of his clothes, which are there in her house, and throw them out on the front lawn. She's going to burn them on a pyre. Everything that symbolizes him, his armor, I'm going to stick those on a pyre and I'm going to put them to flames. And her sister thinks, good, that'll put an end to it. And of course, that's not her plan. Her plan is to throw herself on the pyre, but she doesn't even tell her sister. And no, I want to read this last section here before I get to that. She says, on the couch, 702, above she sets the clothes Aeneas wore, the sword he left, and then his effigy, so a likeness of him. Before the circling altars, the Enchantress, her hair disheveled. So her hair is no longer in order. It's out. It represents her madness. Her hair disheveled. She stands as she invokes aloud 300 gods, especially Chaos and Erebus and Hecate, the triple-shaped Diana. Now, Hecate in Christian renderings, it's in Macbeth as well, but it's also in Dante, represents Satan, a god of the underworld, and Erebus is the deep pit of hell where punishment takes place. She's invoking those subterranean gods and they do represent a sort of an evil. That's what she's invoking. So it's a demonic impulse here. And the triple-shaped Diana, that is Hecate, three-faced virgin. And then there's all sorts of horrible sacrifices here. And at that point, she gives herself over to this and takes her own life. And they are deceived at her intentions. And in the end, she takes her own life. 9:48. She breathes the deep wound in her chest is loud and hoarse 3 times. She tried to raise herself and strained, propped on her elbow, and 3 times she fell back upon the couch. 3 times with wandering eyes she tried to find high heaven's light, and when she found it, sighed. But then all-able Juno pitied her long sorrow and hard death, and from Olympus sent Iris down to free the struggling spirit from her entwining limbs. For as she died a death that was not merited or fated. This was not fated. But miserable and before her time, and spurred by sudden frenzy, furor, Proserpina had not yet cut a golden lock from her crown, and not yet assigned her life to Stygian Orcus. On saffron wings, dew-glistering Iris glides along the sky, drawing 1,000 shifting colors from the facing sun. She halted above the head of Dido. So commanded, I take this lock as an offering to Dis, Pluto, god of the underworld. Lock of your hair. This is going to get you entry. I free you from your body. So she speaks, she cuts the lock with her right hand. At once the warmth was gone, the life passed to the winds. So down she goes. Her life is taken, her spirit is separated from her body, and she goes down to the underworld as a shade. Now Aeneas doesn't even know this, because he's gone. But he will know it soon, because when he goes to the underworld himself, he's going to meet her. Right? But we'll come to that in a second. I want to go to book 6. I'm going to skip over book 5, where there are funeral games, series of games, and these are also an epic convention themselves, these games that take place. But in order to fulfill the demands of history and his destiny, he must go down to the underworld. This will mark him as an epic hero as well. Epic heroes go down to the underworld and rise up from it. It's not heroic to go to the underworld because everybody goes there. It is heroic to arise from it. No mere mortal can do this, but a hero can. Odysseus did it. And Aeneas also will do it. Now, like Aeneas, he goes down there without navigation. This is important. He goes down, and it's as if the ship itself is directed by a wind that comes from who knows where, and there is no navigation. He's brought down into the underworld, and so everyone falls into a divine sleep. All of the individuals, as if they were dead. They fall down as if they were dead. They go down to the underworld, and when they go down, they will meet the Sibyl, who is a prophetess, and she's depicted as the prophecies that she herself is in a sort of a divine madness. The future comes to her. She writes it down on leaves, and a wind comes up and blows the leaves away. So that what's written in the future is of course capable of being seen by this prophetess, and yet she can't tell it. It's a sort of a curse for her. And this is the problem with prophets in general. They foresee a future for the people in whose company they live, and yet the people won't listen. It's even in Scripture that they bear a burden. In the case of scriptural prophecy, it's not just forward-looking; it's backward-looking. It calls people to the law of Moses, basically. Here's where you've gone wrong. Look back. Obey Moses. If you obey Moses and the prophets, that's how you're going to live the future. If you live that way in the present, the way you were called to do in the past, then you'll have a good future. And if you don't do that, I can predict the future. It's pretty easy. Right? Because this has never worked. There's one standard of righteousness. If you live by those words, you will live. You will be blessed. And if you don't, you will be cursed. There you go. So the prophetess is told of that, and I'll skip over some of this, but Book 6 is full of episodes that you will find in later literature, among others. Cerebus, the hellhound, is there. If you remember, or if you've seen the Harry Potter episodes, this dog with 3 heads and 3 throats. This is a hellhound. She gets it right out of the Aeneid. Other writers will do so as well. In fact, you will find that in all of these bits of literature that we read, later authors will just borrow directly from it and not be ashamed about doing it. They will assume that you will know the allusions, and if you don't know them, you'll still enjoy them and think, well, how inventive the author is. But they're not inventive. They're just borrowing what was written before, and that's okay. We'll also meet the Minotaur, half bull, half man, and the terrible actions that happen there. We'll meet Daedalus. Daedalus, who created a flying machine held together with wax, and his son Icarus took Daddy's flying machine out, couldn't control it, so he had the technology to fly, but he didn't have the wisdom to fly it. He flew too close to the sun, the wax melted, and Icarus crashed to the ground. It's a metaphor for the power of technology, but also the need of wisdom to use it. And Icarus, the young man, didn't have it. Anyway, they see him in the underworld as well, referred to in lines 39 to 46 or 47 or thereabouts. But the Sibyl speaks because he needs to know, where do I go and what do I do? He's going to go consult in the underworld. Who's he going to consult? He's going to consult his father, Anchises. Anchises is going to tell him where he should go and what will come. And that vision of the future is going to steel Aeneas to do what he now needs to do. So he goes into the underworld as a sort of a figure like Odysseus, who is wandering, suffering, and not very admirable. And his piety has been questionable because of his dalliance with Dido and his unwillingness to leave Troy. So he's not been, the hero that we would like him to be up to this point. But when he arises out of the underworld, he is going to be a different man. He will be the new man. He will be that sort of pious Aeneas, or at least so Virgil would have us think. And so he will no longer be stuck in the past and lamenting what was lost. He'll be looking to the future and doing what is needed. He'll be ready to do what he was fated to do. But the Sibyl says this, and I'll pick it up here at what's she called? 65. Now call upon the fates for oracles. The god is here, the god. As she says this, before the doors her face and color alter suddenly. Her hair is disarrayed, her breast heaves, and her wild heart swells with frenzy, a lot like Dido. Right? She is taller now. Her voice is more than human, for the power of God is closing in. He breathes upon her. divine inspiration. And are you slow to offer vows and prayers, Trojan Aeneas? Are you slow, she shouts. The terrifying house will never open its giant jaws before your vows are spoken. So she knows why he's there. You want to go down into the underworld, but you cannot do so without the favor of the gods. You need to pray right now for what you wish to do. The Sibyl spoke and then was still. The Trojans' tough bones were shaken by chill shuddering. Their king pours prayers from his deepest breast. And then he prays. And he speaks to her. Her response, 109. But she has not yet given way to Phoebus. She rages, savage in her cavern, tries to drive the great god from her breast, so much the more he tires her out her raving mouth. So the god has to subdue the prophetess. And in the end, he does. And she says to him, I see wars, 122, horrid wars. The Tiber, which is the name of the river flowing through Rome. The Tiber, foaming with much blood. You shall have your Simwa, your Xanthus, and your Doric camp. Already there is in Latium a new Achilles. He too, son of a goddess. Who is the new Achilles? Ternes. So there is already an Achilles there. And who are you going to be? Hector. The Iliad was a fight between the greatest of the Greeks, Achilles, and Hector, the greatest of the Trojans. Achilles won that battle. Now, and Hector was above all exemplified by his love of his city. He had something to lose. Achilles had nothing to lose. Hector did. If he lost the battle, his city was going to go down in flames. If Achilles lost, he died. So Hector's presented very sympathetically by Homer, by the way. But he lost. And now the second Trojan is going to fight a new Achilles. Who's going to win that? Well, this is a great threat. We happen to know in this case it will be the new Hector, which is this man, Aeneas. But a new Achilles is already there, and he too is the son of a goddess. Nor will Juno fail anywhere to hound the Teucrians, while you, a beggar in your need, implore the towns, the tribes through all of Italy, the cause of so much Trojan misery. Again, a foreign bride, a foreign wedding. Note the allusion there. She's speaking of Dido, but every Roman is also thinking of Antony and Cleopatra. A foreign bride, a foreign wedding, a foreign entanglement. This weakens Rome. This is weakening Rome. Don't give yourself over to foreign influence. Do not relent before distress, but be far bolder than your fortune would permit. The first path to your safety, though it seem unlikely, shall yet be a Grecian city. These are the words that from the shrine the Sibyl of Cumae chants. And these hard oracles come roaring from her cavern, mingling true sayings with darkness. So Apollo urges the reins as she raves on. He plies the spurs beneath her breast. But when her frenzy is done, her raging lips are hushed. Hero Aeneas begins. None of the trials you tell of, Virgin, is strange or unexpected. All of these I have foreseen and journeyed in my thought. One thing I ask. Since here is said to be the gateway of the lower king, and here the marsh of overflowing Asheron, one of the rivers of the underworld, may it be granted me to go before the face and presence of my dearest father, Pious Aeneas. I want to see my father when I go down. Could I see him too? Teach me the way. Open the holy doors. For through the fire 1,000 spears behind us, I carried him upon these shoulders. From the press of enemies I drew him on. He was the comrade of my journeying. With me he suffered all the seas and all the threats of sky and wave, and these beyond the power or the potion of old age. However weak he was, indeed he prayed and charged me to seek out and find your threshold. Take pity on me. So Aeneas prayed, clasping the altar, the prophetess began. And now she's going to tell him how he shall do this. Born of the blood of gods and son of Troy's Anchises, easy. The way that leads into Avernus, day and night, the day of darkest dis, is open. It's easy to get down to the underworld. Really easy. Everyone gets there. Everyone dies. So really, the gate's wide open. But to recall your steps, to rise again into the upper air, that is the labor. That is the task. A few whom Jupiter has loved in kindness, or whom blazing worth has raised to heaven as God's sons, returned. Through all the central region runs a forest, encircled by the black curves of Cocytus, another river in the underworld. But if your mind is moved by such a love, so great a longing, twice to swim the lake of Styx, and twice to see black Tartarus, and you are pleased to try this mad attempt, then Trojan, hear what you must first accomplish, and here it is. A bough, line 190, a bough is hidden in a shady tree. Its leaves and pliant stem are golden, set aside as sacred to Proserpina, who was a woman who was snatched by Pluto in life and brought down to the underworld untimely. But it's sacred to her, and there's a golden bough. The grove serves as its screen, and shades enclose the bough in darkened valleys. You won't be able to see it right away. You have to go into the dark woods. Only he may pass beneath earth's secret spaces who first plucks the golden leaf fruit of that tree. So if you want to get back up, you need the golden bough. That's the only way you're going to arise from this. Now, let me just... In the early 20th century, an English anthropologist by the name of Sir James Fraser wrote a compendium of myth. It was an anthropological study, and he studied ancient religious practices of paganism throughout the whole known world. So he looked at not only of Europe, he also looked of Africa and South America, North America, Asia, and so forth. And he found more or less a common mythology, speaking of a sacred plant or so forth. Often it would be a sacred oak, particularly in pagan Europe. The oaks are seen as a sort of a sign of a long life and so forth, and pagan rituals are committed under these oaks and so forth. But the myth is called, or the book is called, The Golden Bough. It goes on for thousands of pages, by the way. It's really an interesting book. But it's about paganism and the cult of worship of nature. And the golden bough is, the title of the book. But here it represents something of Virgil's own strange religious beliefs. Because at this stage in the Aeneid, Aeneas goes from simply being a man and a demigod to being something like a shaman. You know what a shaman is? Like a witch doctor. He's a shamanistic hero. He will go down to the realm of the dead and rise up. He will commune with the dead, and he will come back with, having spoken with the dead, come up with counsel for how to live his life. And Fraser talks about this as being characteristic of paganism. There are sacrifices, often of children for that matter, but and sexual rites, but this connection with sacred plants and so forth. At any rate, this is a famous passage, the golden bough. You must and it cannot be taken by anyone for that matter. She'll go on to say that. She says that when the first bough is torn off, a second grows again with leaves of gold, again of that same metal. So let your eyes search overhead, and when the bough is found, then pluck it down by hand as due. For if the fates have summoned you, the bough will break off easily. But otherwise no power can overcome it. Hard iron cannot help to tear it off. And more, the lifeless body of your friend now lies, but you still have yet to learn of this, defiling all your fleet with death, while you still ask your destiny and linger at our threshold. First you are to carry him to his own place of rest and burial, and bring black cattle as peace offering. So she tells him about a companion who's fallen over the ship, and he doesn't even know that he's lost his companion, but you got to bury him first before you can fulfill the future. You have to treat the dead with respect. But above all, if you're fated to do this, you can pluck the golden bough and go to the underworld, and it will come off easily into your hand. But if it can't, there's no way you can pluck this golden bough. Now, what's interesting here is when he does go down and sees the golden bough and gets it, he rips it off the tree by force. The Sibyl says, you can't do this. He seems to me to do exactly that. He tears it down by force. Just like the Romans, it's fated that they shall use force to bend the fates to their will, more or less. There's a sort of a Roman commitment to military might to exert their power and will over that. But it's fated also, it's fated that Roman military might will bring about this thing. And Aeneas represents the power of Rome in using precisely that. But this famous passage here about the golden bough. But first you have to bury your dead. Now something there of interest is interesting as well, and it's the Roman attitude towards the dead. The dead are considered to their bodies, although their spirits leave them and go down to the underworld, until the bodies are dealt with, they are buried and proper rites are performed. If they're just lying on the ground being eaten by animals, this is dishonoring. The gods are angry at this. The spirit has no rest, and they can't get into the underworld furthermore. So the spirits, if they are unburied or the bodies aren't burnt or whatever, and they're just left to die, they sit at the edge of the river Styx and they cannot pass into the underworld. And they are tormented by this fact. Because what will happen when they go to the underworld ultimately is they will spend 1,000 years there, and the sins of life are burnt off them, and then they are reincarnated and they go back up. But until that point, all they suffer is loss and torment. And they sit there on the edge of the river wanting to cross into the underworld. And there's a guide there by the name of Chiron. I'm not going to pull my short leash here and yank this off. I just broke this the other day. His name is Chiron, Charon. He is a fairy, and you got to pay him to get to the other side. Normally with the dead, by the way he is paid is they stick gold coins in the dead person's eyes. And Chiron takes one of those gold coins as payment to take the body to the other side. Don't ask me why he wants gold coins in the underworld. The underworld is a very rich place, by the way. Pluto, the god of the dead, is presented as a fabulously wealthy. He's the wealthiest of all the gods. To be a plutocrat is the rule of the wealthy, by the way, plutocracy. So Pluto is, yes, he's the god of the underworld, but he's also the god of wealth. Yes.
Do you mean that he is paid to take those who died?
Yep.
Or those who are alive and want to?
No, only the dead go down to the underworld. Chiron will not let him go down into the underworld. In fact, we'll see this in a second, but so I'll read that and we'll illustrate what you were exactly asking. So he sees the golden bough in the midst of the mistletoe, and the thin gold leaf was crackling, 283, and at once Aeneas plucks it and eager breaks the hesitating bough. So he doesn't just take it, he breaks it. As I say, she said you could not do that, he does do it. He just breaks it off. Impossible. And he goes down, and when he goes down, he comes to where is he? Chiron, 394. Grim Chiron is the squalid ferryman, the guardian of these streams, these rivers. His white hairs lie thick, disheveled on his chin. His eyes are fires that stare. A filthy mantle hangs over his shoulder by a knot. Alone he pulls the boat and tends the sails and carries the dead in his dark ship, old as he is, but old age in a god is tough and green. And here a multitude was rushing. So they rush to the banks. Everyone who's dying is immediately going to the underworld. And there's a big crowd there, like a big subway station that's overfilled. And they want to get on this ferry to the other side. Swarming shoreward with men and mothers, bodies of high-hearted heroes stripped of life, and boys and unwed girls and young men set upon the pyre of death before their father's eyes, thick as the leaves that with the early frost of autumn drop and fall within the forest, or as the birds that flock along the beaches in flight from frenzied seas when the chill season drives them across the waves to lands of sun. So just think, it's the autumn right now. The leaves will fall, and they will fall fast, and they will pile up. And the birds will gather in the sky in great numbers, these signs of the onset of death. These are the images that are used in the underworld, and they are used ever after by later writers, by the way. The dead are referred to as leaves that have fallen to the ground, as birds that are gathering before they fly off to the winter. Virgil uses these images. They will be used by Dante and Milton and every writer hereafter of the dead. It's as if they had no soul anymore. They're just things that have fallen. They're just numbers. There's something awful about this, but it's the image that's used. And Chiron takes these souls, now the rest he leaves, thrusting them back, but he keeps them from the beach. That disarray dismays and moves Aeneas. And the Sibyl who's with him, he asks, "O Virgin, what does all this swarming mean? What do these spirits plead? And by what rule must some keep off the bank while others sweep the blue-black waters with their oars?" The words the aged priestess speaks are brief. Anchises' son, certain offspring of the gods, you see, why should she say certain offspring of the gods? Because he's plucked the golden bough. She's convinced. Of course it's faded. He's just ripped the golden bough, and he hasn't just taken it down, he's torn it off. Who else has ever done this? What empire has ever been able to rip the golden bough by force as the fates, as Roman might and military power has done? Who has done this? No one. She says, you see the deep pools of Cocytus and the marsh of Styx, by whose divinity even the high ones are afraid to swear falsely. People swear when their strongest oath is by the dead, the realm of the dead. When somebody wants to swear, and they swear by the dead. Now this is demonic. Christians will regard it as so. It is so. But common practice in the ancient world, they worship demons. So says the early church. These people are worshiping not nothing, they are worshiping demons. All these you see are helpless and unburied. That's the problem. That's why they can't get across. He is distressed by this. That ferryman is Chiron, and the waves will only carry souls that have a tomb. Before his bones have been found their rest, no one may cross the horrid shores and the hoarse waters. They wander for 100 years and hover about these banks until they gain their entry, to visit once again the pools they long for. And he pities them, does Aeneas. And he sees some there. And in the end, he speaks to his companion, and Chiron stops him. 5:11. Enough! Stop there. Whoever you may be who make your way, so armed, down to our waters, tell me why you have come. This is the land of shadows, of sleep and drowsy night. No living bodies can take their passage in the ship of Styx. Indeed, I was not glad to have Alcides or Theseus or Pirithous cross the lake, though the three of them were sons of gods and undefeated in their wars. Alcides tried to drag off in chains the guardian of Tartarus. He tore him trembling from the king's own throne. The others tried to carry the queen away from Pluto's wedding chamber. They tried to get Proserpine. So I don't like this. Chiron says, you're a living man, you are not coming down. And yet at this point, Trojan Aeneas, 532, famed for piety and arms, descends to meet his father down into the deepest shades of Cerebus. And if the image of piety is not enough to move you, and this is the Sibyl speaking, here she shows the branch concealed beneath her robe. So it's not just that Aeneas wants to see his father. Does that not move you, Chiron? No, not really. Well, if that won't move you, how about this? Pulls the branch beneath her robe, you may recognize this bough. And at this, the swollen heart of Chiron stills its anger. He says no more. Mumble, okay, on the boat. There you go. He says no more. He wonders at the sacred gift of the destined wand, so long unseen, and turns his blue-black keel towards shore. He clears the other spirits from the gangways and long benches, and meanwhile admits the massive Aeneas to the boat. Why massive? He hasn't grown. The others are shades. They have no substance. He seems huge by comparison. He's got a big physical body. The rest of them are insubstantial. They're a shade. That's all they are. And he gets onto the boat, and the boat groans at his weight. Now they go down with the triple-throated bark of the giant Cerebus, who crouches. There's the hellhound I referred to. I'll just skip over that. We will see other terrible figures down here, furies. We will also see, I will say this now, but I won't expand on it too much. We will see figures that we never saw in Homer's Odyssey. We will see almost allegorical representations of death. So we will see famine and war. These are names in the underworld. He will meet these figures. And so what this suggests is that Virgil's conception of the underworld now has a sort of a metaphysical sense. So it has a philosophical nature. That what are the things that bring people down to death? Famine, hunger, war. These are names of things in the underworld, and they bring people down to death. So he's thinking philosophically, as Virgil, about death and its consequences. And that, again, is different from what Homer had done. There's no sense of that in Homer's encounter. And he will go down through there, and among them, all of these figures that he will see, and there are many, and I'm going to skip over most of them, but I'll pick up this here at 593. Among them, those he saw in the fields of mourning, that's their given name, he sees various lovers, and among them wandering in that great forest, and with her wound still fresh, Phoenician Dido. And when the Trojan hero recognized her, dim shape among the shadows, just as one who either sees or thinks he sees among the cloud banks when the month is young, the moon rising, he wept and said with tender love, "Unhappy Dido, then the word I had was true, that you were dead, that you pursued your final moment with the sword? Did I bring only death to you? Queen, I swear by the stars, the gods above, and any trust that may be in this under earth, I was unwilling when I had to leave your shores. But those same orders of the gods that now urge on my journey through the shadows, through abandoned thorny lands and deepest night, drove me by their decrees. And I could not believe that with my going I should bring so great a grief as this. But stay your steps. Do not retreat from me. Whom do you flee? This is the last time fate will let us speak." These were the words Aeneas, weeping, used, trying to soothe the burning, fierce-eyed shade. She turned away, eyes to the ground, her face, no more moved by his speech than if she stood as stubborn flint or some Marpessan crag. At last she tore herself away, she fled, and still his enemy into the forest of shadows where Sychaeus, once her husband, answers her sorrows, gives her love for love. Nonetheless, Aeneas, stunned by her unkindly fate, still follows at a distance with tears and pity for her as she goes. It's a memorable, famous scene, and I think it illustrates that Aeneas did actually love Dido. Even at this point, it's plain. But that's precisely what makes him so heroic to the Roman mind. Here's a man who will do his duty against his own deepest heartfelt desires for the glory of the future. He had to do it. He said he had no choice. We did have a choice, in the sense that he could have done what she did. It could have come down to an untimely death. He could have chosen the impious thing to do, but he's pious Aeneas. He did what had to be done. So that he's got that, and he will meet various other figures. He'll meet Greek heroes and Roman heroes there. He will come across Anchises. And let me come to that because we're swiftly running out of time here. And Anchises will give him an encounter of history. By the way, he's going the god or the shades of the underworld before they're through will and before they get reincarnated, they are dipped in the river called Lethe. Lethe. And that makes them forget their identity. And then they're reincarnated. They're given a new body. So the former identity that they had in that body, in that shade, is lost, and the soul is then reincarnated. Now, this will have a tremendous impact on Roman views of personal identity and so forth. So you're a spirit in a body, but the body is not even your real identity. There's a spiritual reality. So the spirit will always be regarded as superior to the body. The Christian doctrine of the incarnation changes the whole view of bodily importance, the significance of the human body, etc. You can no longer have sex with priestesses and so forth and degrade your human body because saying that that's not me, it's a sacrifice that's being made, etc. There's no disjunction between the spirit and the body. What you do in the body is what happens to you. So in Romans 12 it says, offer up your bodies as living sacrifices, right? And this is your spiritual act of worship, right? Connecting a body with a spiritual act. It would never occur to Virgil to think this way. It didn't occur to Plato to think this way. It's unknown in the Roman world, in the ancient world. They were mind-body dualists. There was no unity here. Whereas in Christian theology, a person's body is a part of who they really are. And there's a distinction, but there's no separation. What you do in your body is you. It's not all of you. If it were all of you, when you physically die, that would be the end of you. But it's still part of you, and you can't do what the pagans do with their bodies. That's Christian teaching. That's because of the incarnation. God himself becomes a man, a real human being. So I just say that because, as I say, Lethe in the underworld, they are dipped into the waters of, and they forget their identity, and they get ready to go back to the earth. But at this stage in the underworld, there's a separation as well between the realm of the blessed, the Champs-Élysées in France, right in Paris. There's a place called the Champs-Élysées. These are the Elysian fields. This is where the good figures go in the underworld. So in Virgil, there's a different differentiation. Everyone goes down to the dead. But the good figures seem to have some sort of happiness, however shadowy and fleeting. And they're doing chariot races and having games, just like people in the world above are doing. I don't know why they do this, but that they seem to be sort of given some benefit for living good lives. But they're still in the underworld. They're in the Elysian fields. But the malefactors go down to a place called Tartarus, and they're tormented there and punished for it. So there's a sense of punishment for ill deeds in this life. So virtue is rewarded and vice is punished in Virgil's understanding here. And as I say, there's a metaphysical sense. But when he comes down here, he is now given fate, and his fate is presented as history. We get a historical account of the early foundation of Rome. And by the way, to be accurate, the founders of Rome are not Aeneas, it's Remus and Romulus. You've heard that story, the two brothers, right? Suckling under a wild wolf, and one slays his brother and founds Rome. That's 300 years after this. That's Roman legend. They will fulfill this, but he's the early beginnings. There's nothing there until the Trojan Aeneas lands there. But history is presented like a visual spectacle, and Anchises shows Aeneas who his descendants will be. He talks about, so this is going to happen, and this will then happen, and so we're just given an account of Roman ancient history, all the way up to the present day. And you will find it when we come to Paradise Lost next semester, books 11 and 12. This is what the angel does with Adam after he's fallen and he's given the promise of the future. He will show him what will happen after him. So you'll have a son. His name will be Cain. You'll have another son. His name will be Abel. Guess what? Cain's going to slay Abel. Oh, no. And Adam's like tearing his hair out. This is terrible. And then, then there's this whole account of salvation history, and it carries all the way up to not just the coming of Christ, but all the way up to the present day. That's what Milton does. And when he does this, he's following the Virgilian epic here. So history up to this point is being told, and it's presented in spatial terms, in the sense it's one vista, it's one picture. He sees it all, as if it were painted along a wall. And Aeneas is able to see at this point direct descendants of Augustus, because Augustus is the last one mentioned. And he will bring about the golden age that was thought to be lost. And you are going to bring that about by what you're about to do. So he goes down and he relays his ideology that Rome in some ways will be the return of the golden age. But I wanted to point to you one interesting feature of this, and it's quite extraordinary at the end of all this. It's how it concludes. It was there in the Odyssey as well, these two gates that come out of the underworld. But it's particularly poignant here because this is about the future. 1191. There are two gates of sleep. Sleep is like death. There are two gates of sleep. The one is said to be of horn. Through it, an easy exit is given to true shades. The other is made of polished ivory, perfect, glittering. But through that way, the spirits send false dreams into the world above. And here Anchises, when he is done with words, accompanies the Sibyl and his son together, and he sends them through the gate of ivory. The gate of false dreams. The whole story that's just been told about the history and the future glory of Rome and the golden age, when there's no more war and we've returned to the age of Saturn, that story, that vision that's been given to Aeneas, he sent back up through the gate of false dreams. What's Virgil telling the audience? It's quite an extraordinary thing. Because there's no doubt in my mind that he is talking about the glory of Rome, but on the other hand, he seems to be undermining his own case here. This will not be a return to the end of war. Why? Probably because the passions still reign in the Roman people. So this is heroic, to subdue your passions. But will that mean the end of wars with Augustus? Virgil doesn't seem to think so. This is a false dream that we're going to return to an age of a golden age, when there's no more peace or violence or death or pain or suffering and so forth. That's not possible. There is a greatness being celebrated here in the virtue of pious Aeneas, but it will not bring about lasting peace. Not the kind of peace that Virgil, the Stoic, regards as of ultimate importance, the spiritual peace, which he will also write about in his eclogues. And I'm going to give you that when we come to read, just before we come to read Dante's Inferno, because Virgil's view of the Golden Age seemed to prophesy the coming of a Messiah. A child who and a time when lambs would lie down with lions, and a child would grab a serpent and he wouldn't be stung or wouldn't be bitten by the serpent, wouldn't die of poison. That's Virgil, who does not know Christ. But he speaks of this. For that reason, Virgil is read, as I said, by later Christian authors as having himself a sort of prophetic function. He didn't see the light, but he held the light behind his back and allowed other people to see it through his writing. It's like the blind Sibyl. He had a divine madness, but he didn't see clearly himself, but others saw clearly by him. We'll come to that when we come to it. But Book 6 concludes with him rising out of that, and then he goes on to be the resolute man that he was supposed to be. Now he has seen the future. He knows what's going to happen, and there's no more turning back. He's going to go to the promised land, and he's going to fight like Achilles against the second Achilles, Ternes, and subdue him. But the epic finishes on a very distressing note with Ternes fallen to the ground, and Aeneas stabs him in the chest. He's falling, he's pleading for mercy. Aeneas kills him while he's pleading for mercy. This is a very Roman thing to do, in the sense it's a brutal thing to do, but it's not very admirable. It's brutal. And what does Virgil think of this? Does Virgil think this is a terrible thing to do? I'm not sure he does. I think it's just necessary. This is Roman brutality. We blanch at it. It's like the guy's begging for mercy. Why are you going to kill him? Well, because it's a necessary deed, politically necessary. Anyway, I'll leave you with that. And